London, 1837. The air was thick with perfume and pride, and beneath the chandeliers of the Ashcombe estate, society glittered like 1,000 watchful eyes. The spring season had begun with renewed cruelty. Gossip had found its favorite prey. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe stood by the mirrored wall, her gloved hands clasped around her fan, her gaze lowered as laughter drifted past her like perfume that did not belong to her world. Her father's name, once a symbol of influence, now hung like a stain upon her family, whispered between sips of champagne. No man had approached her card tonight, and though her composure never faltered, humiliation burned quietly behind her pale composure. The orchestra swelled, the chandeliers trembled with the rhythm, and still she stood alone, pretending to admire the marble columns. Her reflection in the mirror betrayed her. The softness of her brown eyes, the restrained sorrow in her half-smile, the loneliness of a woman born to gentility yet denied its comfort. Around her, silks rustled, diamonds caught the light, and the murmur of society played like a cruel overture to her disgrace. And then, as if conjured from the very hush between the notes, he appeared. The room seemed to still itself for the Duke of Winthorpe. Adrian Hawthorne, the soldier returned, the widowed duke, the man who had refused every invitation for years. His entrance cut through the chatter like a blade through silk. Every gaze followed him, even those who pretended not to. Tall, austere, with the haunted poise of a man carved from something sterner than joy, he moved as one who commanded without effort. Rumor said he had returned from France not merely to reclaim his estates, but to settle debts that went deeper than gold or honor. Eleanor's heart quickened, not from admiration, but from that strange, nervous awe that overtakes one standing too near to danger. She had heard the whispers, that his father had died ruined, disgraced by false charges that bore her father's signature. Yet none could prove it, and none dared speak it aloud. She thought little of vengeance or men's pride. She only knew that the Duke's eyes, when they found her across the ballroom, were unreadable, dark as storm water and twice as deep. He did not approach at once. He allowed the murmurs to rise, let the tension coil and tighten. Only when the final waltz began, slow and luminous, did he move toward her. Society's whispers turned to stunned silence as he stopped before her, bowing with the gravity of ritual. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice low and even, "if you are not otherwise engaged, may I claim the honor of this dance?" For a moment, she thought he was mocking her. No man had addressed her with such calm courtesy in months. Yet his expression betrayed nothing. Her throat tightened. "You may, your grace," she managed, and allowed him to lead her to the floor. The waltz began, a lilting melody of violins. His hand found the small of her back, polite, proper, yet steady with quiet strength. As they turned beneath the chandeliers, Eleanor felt the gaze of every woman pierce her like needles. His nearness was disquieting, his scent faintly of cedar and rain. His eyes never left hers, and she, though trembling, did not look away. "You seem surprised," he murmured. "I am seldom accustomed to such attention," she replied softly, keeping her poise. "Then society has been unkind." "It has memory, your grace. And memory is rarely merciful." He smiled faintly, but it was not a kind smile. "Nor is justice." The word lingered between them. Justice, a blade with no sheath. She did not understand it yet, but it would soon define her life. Around them, the crowd swayed in polite fascination. Some whispered that perhaps the Duke meant to revive her family's fortunes. Others whispered darker things, that this was the beginning of something orchestrated. As the music slowed, Eleanor felt the strange pull of his gaze soften for a heartbeat. There was pain there, hidden beneath the marble mask, as if he had forgotten himself in her presence. But when the music ended, he released her hand with precise formality, bowed once more, and left her standing amid the murmur of scandal. That night, London did not sleep. The morning papers spoke of nothing but the dance, the fallen lady and the Duke who had chosen her before all others. Some said it was romance, others a cruel jest. Within days, invitations poured into the Ashcombe estate, not for affection, but curiosity. Society loved spectacle, and Eleanor had unwittingly become its centerpiece. When the Duke's letter arrived, sealed in black wax, her heart hesitated before her hand did. The script was bold and unyielding, a formal proposal of marriage. There were no professions of love, no delicate flatteries, only the cold, perfect phrasing of duty. Her father accepted before she could object. His pride demanded the alliance, and his debts demanded rescue. The night before the engagement announcement, Eleanor stood by her bedroom window, the city below veiled in rain. The letter lay open upon her dressing table, the ink gleaming faintly under candlelight. She read the words again. "It is my desire to unite our families and restore what was lost." She did not know what he meant by lost, but the phrasing chilled her. Still, something within her, pride, perhaps, or that fragile longing that every heart carries, whispered that maybe kindness could follow duty. At the same hour, miles away in Winthorpe House, Adrian Hawthorne stood in his study, the same rain lashing against the tall windows. Before him lay 2 letters, one from her father, consenting to the marriage, and another, older, creased and bitter, from his own father, written before the ruin. He traced the final line with a slow, deliberate finger. "Ashcombe's treachery will cost us everything." He folded both letters together and slid them into the fire. The flames curled high, devouring ink and history alike. In the reflection of the burning hearth, his expression softened for only a breath before hardening again. "It ends with her," he murmured, though whether it was a vow or a warning, even he could not say. When dawn came, London's bells rang in celebration of their betrothal. The city rejoiced, for scandal had found new wings. Eleanor, pale yet composed, stepped into the carriage beside her father, the letter tucked against her heart like a secret she could not read. The streets blurred past, and in the distance, the spires of St. George's rose against a grey sky. She did not yet know that her marriage would be the Duke's weapon, nor that her grace would one day become his undoing. For now, there was only the sound of hooves striking wet cobblestone, and the echo of his voice across the ballroom, smooth, deliberate, unforgettable. The carriage turned toward Winthorpe, and with it, toward the beginning of a story that society would one day whisper not as scandal, but as legend. Rain fell like lace upon the carriage windows as Lady Eleanor Hawthorne, newly made Duchess of Winthorpe, crossed the threshold of her husband's ancestral estate. Winthorpe Hall loomed before her, vast and solemn, its grey stone walls softened only by the faint bloom of climbing ivy. Inside, the air smelled of old books, waxed wood, and the weight of history. Servants bowed as they entered, their faces careful and unreadable. At the heart of it all stood the Duke, her husband, his expression a study in restraint. He had been courteous since their vows but never kind. His voice carried civility without warmth. His eyes observed her as one might a stranger's portrait, appreciating its form but not its soul. Their wedding had been the talk of London. It was neither joyous nor tragic, merely remarkable in its restraint. The Duke had stood beside her at the altar as though performing a duty ordained by reason, not affection. His vows had been flawless, his manner irreproachable, yet his touch during the ceremony had been light as frost. Eleanor, for all her quiet poise, had felt the chill of it deep in her bones. Still, she had met his gaze with serenity, believing that perhaps affection could be built, as any house might, slowly, stone by stone. The days that followed disabused her of that hope. Breakfasts were taken in silence. Dinners were brief, polite affairs punctuated by the scrape of silver and the measured cadence of his replies. He retired to his study each evening, leaving her to dine with her thoughts and the ticking of the long case clock. When she spoke, he listened. When she smiled, he acknowledged. But he never met her heart halfway. There was an invisible wall between them, one she could neither scale nor see. Yet she refused to despair. There was something in Eleanor, something quiet but unyielding, that would not bend to neglect. She began to walk the grounds, speaking kindly to the gardeners and housemaids, tending to small details long ignored. In the east courtyard, where brambles had overtaken marble urns, she cut away the thorns herself until pale roses dared to bloom again. The servants, long accustomed to cold order, began to smile when she passed. She thanked them by name, restored warmth to the halls, and filled forgotten rooms with flowers and sunlight. The Duke noticed. He would not admit it, even to himself, but her presence altered the air. Once, crossing the gallery, he paused before an open door and found her seated at the piano, the soft notes of a nocturne trembling through the dusk. She did not see him, and he did not enter, yet the sound lingered in him long after he left. It disturbed him, not because it displeased, but because it reached him somewhere he had long since fortified. He told himself she was clever in her gentleness, that her kindness was a strategy, her smiles a trap. Revenge required distance, and she was dismantling it without ever knowing she fought him. Still, he held to his plan. Her father's letters of apology remained unanswered on his desk. Her happiness, he thought, would serve as a silent punishment to the man who had destroyed his own family's honor. Yet as the weeks turned into months, vengeance no longer felt clean, it began to taste of ash. The first spark of scandal arrived with summer. A house party of neighboring nobles filled Winthorpe's halls with laughter and deceitful compliments. Among them was Lady Selina Harbury, a widow of sharp tongue and colder heart, who had once fancied herself destined to become the Duchess. Her jealousy, masked by charm, found easy prey in the whispers of drawing-rooms. By the second evening, rumors circulated that the new Duchess had married for power, that she sought to polish her family's disgrace by ensnaring a grieving duke. Eleanor heard the laughter behind her back and bore it with dignity, as she bore all things, with silence and grace. But that night, at dinner, when Lady Harbury allowed her venom to drip too openly, something shifted. "One wonders, your grace," she purred, turning to Adrian, "if devotion may be purchased as easily as dowries." The table froze. The Duke set down his glass. His gaze, when it met the widow's, could have cut marble. "In my experience," he said calmly, "devotion is earned by those who deserve it. My wife, for instance, commands it without effort." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Harbury's painted smile faltered. Eleanor's hand trembled beneath the tablecloth. It was the first time he had called her my wife without detachment, the first time the words carried weight. Later, in the privacy of her chambers, Eleanor allowed herself a single tear, not from joy, but from the bewildering ache of hope. She knew not what had moved him to defend her, nor what it might mean. Yet something in her heart, fragile, persistent, began to stir again. She wrote him a note that night, in her elegant, slanted hand. "For your kindness at supper, my thanks. The gardens flourish again, though the western fountain remains still. Perhaps one day you might see them." She sealed it with wax and left it at his study door. He found it hours later, long after midnight. The house slept. The candle burned low beside the unopened brandy. He read her words once, then twice. No reproach, no plea, only quiet gratitude. He turned it over in his hand, noticing the faint scent of pressed violets upon the paper. Something within him stirred, a memory, perhaps, of gentler years before ambition and betrayal had hardened him. He set the note aside, yet could not bring himself to discard it. The following afternoon, he passed through the gardens unannounced. The roses she had revived were in bloom, the air heavy with fragrance. She was there, kneeling by the fountain, her gown trailing in the grass, her fingers damp with earth. For a long moment he watched her, unseen, until she looked up and met his gaze. Neither spoke. The breeze carried the faint song of water from the newly repaired fountain, its soft trickle the only sound between them. That evening, when Eleanor returned to her room, she found upon her writing desk a small silver pocket watch, polished, engraved with delicate precision. On the back, a Latin phrase, Honorem ante omnia. She recognized it at once, the Hawthorne family's forgotten motto. Beneath it, a note in his hand, "For the garden that now breathes again." She pressed the watch to her heart, unsure whether to weep or smile. In that moment, revenge had begun to unravel. But whispers never rest for long in England's drawing-rooms. The very next morning, a new rumor rode from London. News that the Duke of Winthorpe's fortune was built upon ruin, that his heart, despite his fine defense, remained elsewhere. Eleanor folded the newspaper and stared at the gray horizon beyond the window. The fountains murmured below, the roses swayed in the wind, and she felt the fragile balance between them tremble. Downstairs, Adrian stood at the same window, unaware she watched him from above. The light fell across his face, catching the smallest flicker of doubt in his eyes. The storm that had begun with vengeance was shifting, gathering power in another form entirely, one that neither of them yet understood. And as the sun slipped behind the moors, both wondered, silently and apart, which would conquer the other first, pride or love. Summer lingered over Winthorpe like a held breath. The roses had climbed higher than ever, their scent drifting through the open windows of the hall. Yet within, the air trembled with tension unspoken. Adrian Hawthorne, Duke of Winthorpe, moved through his house as a man haunted by the echo of his own design. The revenge that once guided every word, every gesture, now hung about him like a discarded cloak. He had achieved the marriage he sought, shamed the family that wronged his father, and still, satisfaction eluded him. In its place had come a quiet unrest, born of a woman's steady grace and the growing knowledge that he no longer desired her suffering. Eleanor had changed everything without defiance or demand. She had softened the servants' fear, brightened corridors long surrendered to dust, and, in her quiet way, breathed gentleness where bitterness had once ruled. Yet she kept her distance, sensing that his silence was no longer disdain but torment. She carried herself with the same measured dignity that had first unsettled him, the calm of a woman who knew pain but refused to be shaped by it. When he passed her in the corridors, she would lower her gaze slightly, her voice polite, her expression serene, as if to spare them both the cruelty of what still stood unspoken. Then came the fever. It began in the nearby village and spread quickly among the laborers who worked the Duke's lands. Eleanor went against every warning, tending to the sick herself. She nursed children, sat beside dying mothers, and carried water through the fields with her own hands. When Adrian discovered this, anger and fear warred within him. He forbade her to go again, his voice sharper than he intended, but she met him with calm defiance. "You cannot ask me to do nothing while they suffer," she said softly. "A title does not free me from duty." Her words silenced him. She left that night, and when the morning came, she did not return. He found her 2 days later, pale and fevered, collapsed in the rectory garden. He lifted her himself, carried her back to Winthorpe through driving rain, and laid her upon their bed, the same bed he had never shared with her. The physician shook his head gravely. The illness was severe. 4 nights, Adrian refused to leave her side. He dismissed the servants, read her letters aloud when she stirred, and sat through endless hours of silence broken only by her ragged breath. When she whispered deliriously in the dark, pleas for forgiveness, for peace, his heart broke in ways vengeance had never imagined. On the 3rd night, as thunder rolled beyond the windows, he took her hand and spoke at last the truth that had poisoned them both. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice shaking, "I wronged you before ever I knew you. I wed you not from affection, but from hate for your father, who destroyed mine. I meant to ruin you as he ruined us." He bowed his head, unable to bear the sight of her stillness. "And yet, you have given me everything I swore to despise. I cannot forgive myself for what I've done." Her lashes fluttered, and she turned her face slightly toward him. When she spoke, her voice was barely more than breath. "Then let your vengeance die here," she murmured. "Hatred cannot rebuild what love might." Her fingers tightened weakly around his. "Do not let your father's ghost keep you from living." And with that, she sank once more into silence. By morning, the fever broke. The physician called it a miracle, but Adrian knew better. It was mercy. He stepped out into the sunlight for the first time in weeks, every breath a vow to honor what she had given him, another chance. The next days were filled with quiet recovery. He sent physicians and supplies to the village, restored pensions to old tenants, and reopened the parish school his father had once built. Each act of restitution felt like a stone lifted from his chest. When Eleanor regained her strength, he came to her not as a duke but as a man stripped bare of pride. In the garden she had revived, beneath the same fountain where they had first met in uneasy silence, he stood before her, uncertain. She was seated on a bench, a shawl about her shoulders, her face pale but her eyes alive with calm. "You look well, my lord," she said, her tone light but her gaze searching. "I look nothing of the sort," he replied with a faint smile. "But I mean to, if you'll permit me to try." She laughed softly, the sound like the first note of spring after a long frost. He took a step closer, holding her gaze. "I burned the letters," he confessed. "Every word my father wrote of hatred, every plan of revenge. They are gone. I do not wish to live in their shadow any longer." She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "And what do you wish to live for, Adrian?" "For forgiveness," he said simply. "And for you, if you will have me now, not as penance but as husband. Her eyes filled with tears that did not fall. Then we shall start again, she whispered. Not as enemies bound by the past, but as souls free to choose. He extended his hand. She placed hers within it. The gesture was simple, yet it carried the weight of all that had passed between them. They walked slowly through the garden, their steps in rhythm, the light turning golden across the lawns. The rose called Eleanor's Grace, newly planted by his order, caught the last rays of the sun, its petals glowing like soft fire. He paused before it, touching the bloom with reverence. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It is yours," he answered. "And so am I." The evening deepened, the air cool and still. From the open windows of the hall came the faint sound of a piano, the melody she had once played alone, now echoing through a house no longer cold. He turned to her, unable to resist the words that rose unbidden. "I married you for revenge," he said softly, "but I live now only for your forgiveness." She met his gaze, her lips trembling into a smile that seemed to hold both sorrow and light. "Then you have already been forgiven," she replied. They walked on, hand in hand, the setting sun painting their path in amber and rose. The fountain murmured behind them, the estate quiet except for the distant song of a nightingale. Later, when darkness settled and the first stars appeared, the narrator's voice would tell what they could not, that in the ruthless world of England's high society, it was not vengeance or fortune that redeemed a man's heart, but the steadfast mercy of a woman's love. And though the years would pass, and history would forget the scandal that bound them, Winthorpe's roses would bloom each summer in memory of that truth. Fragile, enduring, and forever fragrant in the garden where forgiveness first took root.